Appleknocker Radio.
Alright, hello my friends. Today I'm going to be discussing the newly released book by Ender Traditions, Lightbringers of the North, Secrets of the Occult Tradition of Finland. I would also like to announce that I will be interviewing one of the authors of this book next week, and I can't wait to share that interview with all of you. There are a few things in life that I find more enjoyable than talking to these authors and talking to these people and then getting to share it with all of you. Really, it's the funnest thing in the world, and it's the most gratifying and satisfying thing. I just love sharing these things with people. So that interview will be coming up shortly. On to the book. So the last book that I reviewed or discussed was The Four Aims by Mark Stavish. That book is amazing for very different reasons. That book is a book of practical application of esoteric / spiritual / hermetic ideas / alchemical ideas. This book is not practical application. This book is historical and cultural analysis. And in that capacity, it is absolutely terrific. The writing style is it's just a beautifully written book. And there's this, I don't know if it's intentional or not, there's this like gallows humor in it. And I personally, I love when humor is so subtle. I really like dark humor. Don't know why. I really like dark humor, especially when it's so subtle that you can't even really be sure that he's joking, you know? I just find that really, it's funny. The book had me laughing out loud. I'm actually going to read a passage that had me laughing out loud before this interview is over, or before this review is over. So I don't want to poach from the material, so I don't want to go too deeply into it. Though I do know that there are some things in there that are just simply too fascinating for me to not cover later on during the evolution of this channel. Introduced me to a lot of really, really insane and fascinating and bizarre pieces of history, as well as some really beautiful, useful, and just plain fascinating pieces of history. But I do want to touch upon a couple highlights to kind of whet people's appetite, because I do highly encourage buying this book. Number one, what I know a lot of you will be interested in, he discusses Gurdjieff's time in Finland. Gurdjieff actually, his tie-ins with Finland were actually a little more extensive than I had realized. One thing I found very interesting, the book In Search of the Miraculous, which I assume many of you out there have read, and if you have not, there's honestly few books that I personally could recommend higher than that book. But In Search for the Miraculous, Ouspensky, who is a very influential mathematician, recounts that Gurdjieff actually spoke to him telepathically. I remember that scene. It's actually one of the scenes that stands out the most for me in the book. But what I did not realize, or what I did not remember, is that scene happened in Finland. So Gurdjieff had quite a bit of tie-ins with Finland, and that's a very interesting aspect of the book. Another very interesting aspect of the book is the introduction to me anyway. I had never heard of this figure named Pekka Ervast. The book describes him as maybe the most influential Finnish esoteric figure in the history of that nation and to have influenced the world as a whole. Very interesting gentleman. The thing that I appreciated most about his story was the sincerity of his passion. From the time he was a young man to the time he died, he was all in. He was all in. He was this theosophy was the big thing that got him. That was this particular manifestation of the search for the miraculous, of the esoteric, however you want to phrase it. But he was the real deal. He was absolutely dedicated from the time he was young till the time he died. Produced a remarkable amount of books and materials and magazines, and as well as like helping start schools. And the guy was just an engine of productivity his entire life, and a really remarkable person. The book also discusses, I had never heard of the 6th and 7th books of Moses, which is apparently also sometimes called the Black Bible, or it could be reversed. Maybe it's usually called the Black Bible, but it's sometimes called the 6th and 7th books of Moses. Regardless, I'm not really sure. But apparently it's like a staple book of the dark occult in Finland. I find that rather fascinating. Just the titles of the books alone are fascinating, but apparently the contents of them are dark enough that they don't only bother normie, mainstream people. Even Pekka Ervast, he was very enthusiastic about the occult and the esoteric and the spiritual. Even Pekka warned against the darkness of this book. So that's pretty interesting. There's one story recounted in there, apparently, of a young man attempting the magic in this book and kind of driving himself crazy, or getting himself surrounded by demons, however you want to look at it. There's also this story. There's too much to it to really go into here, but there's this wild story about, I think it happened in the late 1920s, early 1930s, where they started finding body parts in this stream, in this industrial area of Finland, and they discovered that the body parts were being taken from a cemetery or a morgue, and the story, that in itself is bizarre enough, right? But it triggered this almost like a, I hesitate to call it a hysteria, because I don't really know if that's fair, because I mean there really were people behind this thing, but it just kicked off this whole thing that led to a whole lot of benign secret societies and people with alternative beliefs being hounded, basically, in some cases having their lives ruined. Very strange story. I mean, it starts, they have a photograph of it. It starts with, I think it was a bus driver who found a human hand. He had bent down to drink out of a stream and found a human hand on a rock. And that's what kicked this whole thing off. And then there was a thumb. Somebody later found a thumb. And then that just led to all kinds of body parts. Very, very strange story. That leads to introduces you to all of these really bizarre and fascinating figures that were living in Finland at that time. So I really encourage people to read this book. Like I said, this is not a book of practice, like people who are trying to experiment or just expand on any kind of spiritual practice or anything. That's not what this book is about. This book is about history, delving into these topics, these fascinating figures in these wild stories, as well as these really inspirational figures such as Pekka Ervast, who I actually found one of his books on PDF form online. I will absolutely be reading that book. Like I said, Pekka Ervast was the real deal, and I definitely plan on talking about him more in the future. I really admire these people that are sincerely devoted to the path, that takes something, that takes something. Especially, he was a very intelligent young man who he could have done all kinds of things with his life, and he stuck to his guns, and he followed the path that was calling to him. And I admire that. I admire that quality in anybody, whether it's in these spheres or in any spheres. I admire people with conviction and courage. Pekka Ervast definitely had both of those things in spades. But, so, long story short, I highly recommend this book. And I also hope that you all keep your eyes peeled for when I interview the author. And because I can't wait to share that with all of you. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think it's going to be a really fascinating one. But in the meantime, like I said, if you're looking for a really interesting read, definitely recommend this book. So that's about it, and peace out, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. I'm back because I promised you I was going to read a passage from the book, and I forgot to do it. I'm going to do it right now. This passage I find very funny. Now this is, like when you're dealing with that subtle dark humor, you can't just give close to the punchline. It doesn't work that way. It's like if somebody's telling you about some horrific event that they saw on the way to work, and they're telling you this story about all these terrible things that they saw, and then they say, yeah, it looked like they were having a bad day, right? It's only funny if you go along for the ride. You got to hear the whole thing. So I kind of got to read this whole passage. All right, so Helsingin Sanomat reported that a police search, and I'm sorry, I don't speak Finland. I have been studying Russian for a couple years. It's a very difficult language. I'm trying, but I don't speak Finnish, and so there's a good chance I'm going to mispronounce some of these words. All right, so Helsingin Sanomat reported that a police search of Saranaimo's home had turned up photographs of corpses and strange quasi-religious literature, such as the infamous Black Bible, Musta Ramutu, or the 6th and 7th books of Moses, in a booklet of the Panacea water healing method. The method, which was based on the writings of the British mystic Joanna Southcott, made use of a linen cloth blessed by Panacea Society leader Octavio Bartrop, and believed to have healing powers. A small patch of the blessed cloth, which one had to order by mail from England, could then be placed into a jug of water without a prayer in order to transfer the healing power to the water. The method was introduced to Finland by none other than Pekka Ervast, who always carried a patch of the cloth with him. According to Ervast, the cloth worked flawlessly, even though he had suffered a heart attack on the very first day after receiving it. I don't know. I don't know if I delivered that properly. I hope, man. I hope. But I don't know. Maybe I should work on it more and deliver it a little better. Some things are just better in writing than spoken. I found that hilarious. And, yeah. No disrespect to Pekka Ervast. Like I said, I respect Pekka Ervast tremendously. I just found that passage to be very amusing, and I found kind of the absurdity of it to be very amusing. So that's about it. Peace out, my friends. Great book. Check it out.